You're listening to Learning is the New Working, a podcast by the Learning Futures Group about the future of workplace learning and the people helping define it. We're very grateful for the team at NovoEd for their sponsorship of this season. Global enterprises rely on NovoEd's collaborative online learning platform to build high-value capabilities that result in real impact. With NovoEd, you deliver powerful, engaging learning that activates deep skill development and drives measurable business outcomes. NovoEd will host a live webinar later in the season where Danny, Stacia and I will reflect on what we've learned, the implications for you as learning and talent teams, and take your questions and comments live. To reserve your seat, to get your questions in, and find other bonus materials, please register now at www.novoed.com/purpose. This episode is part of Season 7, our Is Purpose Working season, which is a collaboration with Red Thread Research. Today's guest is Jeff Orlando. He's Vice President of Global Learning and Leadership Development at Medtronic. Medtronic is the world's largest medical technology company with operations in over 150 countries, 30+ billion in revenue, and over 95,000 employees. It's a med tech industry leader whose products treat 70 different health conditions, including cardiac devices, cranial and spine robotics, insulin pumps, surgical tools, and patient monitoring systems. They serve over 72 million people each year. Today, Danny and Stacia asked the questions, but I sat down with them afterwards to ask them what their key learnings and takeaways were from their conversation with Jeff. And I'm going to share that debrief with you first by way of an executive summary, and then I highly recommend that you listen into the full conversation with Jeff, which adds materially to our journey to understand the impact of purpose on talent management. Danny, I'm going to put you on the spot first. What's the 2 or 3 things that you took away from this morning's conversation that helped you think a little bit differently about purpose?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really struck me is there seems to be a passion surrounding purpose. So these organizations that have a purpose and make decisions based on the purpose tend to have a real passion for what they're doing. And I think that probably hit me harder than it has in the past. I also love his idea, calling their mission statement or their purpose a constitution. So instead of just sticking it on the wall and hoping somebody reads it as they pass it in the break room, they actually use it to make decisions. They actually bring it up in really hard discussions and say, this is what we're setting forth to do. Here's how we need to make this decision based on that.
I agree. It was really interesting to hear him talk about them sort of referring back to that in real-time decision-making, especially during the sort of tumultuous year that we have. He said it was written on important paper, which I really like that image.
Yeah. The other thing that I really like about his organization, and I mentioned this in the podcast, I heard about Medtronic really early on in my career because of these meetings that they have every year where they invite in the people whose lives they have affected. So the doctors and the patients and community and the workers, everybody gets together and sort of, takes a moment to absorb that purpose and realize it and remind themselves why they're doing it.
Yeah. Stacia, takeaways for you.
Yeah, building on a few things that you all just said. One of them was his point about how they were all stewards of the mission. He talked about how the oldest or the most tenured employee had been there for 41 years, but the mission had been written even before that person, and how no one there had been around. And so they were all just stewards of this concept, really. And that really struck with me. We mentioned this in the first podcast. I've done some reading on the history of organizations who have tried to be, do well by doing good. And it seems like those who are the most sustaining give a lot of thought to what's written down and what the governance will be around purpose. And so to hear Jeff say that and to hear how alive and well it is right now really struck me.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm learning through all of these conversations is purpose is a very sort of personal thing. And there's this interplay between the organizational purpose and individual people's purpose. And one of our interviewers that we'll hear from later talks about purpose can occur in pockets across the organization. But this was a company that clearly, sort of foundationally at its roots, had a clear sense of purpose. And I think, that's maybe a factor of its early evolution, and maybe it's a factor of the kind of work that they do as well. But it seemed very, very much built into the framework.
The other thing I took away was the importance of ceremony. You mentioned, Danny, that basically what is a ceremony, a bringing together of people to talk about the impact of the company. Jeff also mentioned the 2-pound, medal, and it's a lot about ceremony, rite of passage, honoring the work that they do, the purpose they do, and really why they gather together. And that just struck me as incredibly meaningful. I've done a lot of research on recognition, and recognition is, I think, a part of that for sure. But this literally, I think, is ceremony to reinforce purpose. And that to me was meaningful and beautiful.
I love that too. He used the phrase symbolism and ritual. And I actually think, one of the purposes of this podcast series for me is to try and get takeaways, try to get actionable things that people can use to sort of get better in their practice. And I think it's very difficult for a head of L&D or a head of talent to go write a constitution for their organization. That's something that just takes history and time. But I do think these rituals and symbols, that's something that's really can be worked on. And I think L&D in particular has an important role to play in creating the space and time for those kind of rituals to happen. I also like the whole frame in that Jeff was relatively new to the company. He heard about it in his interview and his recruitment process. It was made very explicit to him, the purpose. And yet, he didn't quite fully believe it. And how surprised he was at how deeply kind of entwined it is. So I think it was useful to talk to somebody who's kind of fresh into this particular company because they have a nice broad perspective. And he was very genuine in his kind of learnings around it.
Yet what was fascinated me too, Chris, is he's only 7 months in, but he knew the history cold. It clearly gets embedded because he could just talk about it, and he talked about it with an incredible amount of just understanding. And so that spoke volumes to me too.
Got it. There were 2 other quotes that I took away to sort of wrap up my point of view on this. One is, you can't fake it, which I think is absolutely the litmus test. I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. You can't fake it. And the second one, he was talking about a really interesting phrase that one of his leaders used when they did some agile thinking around the crunch that the pandemic created for them. And he used the phrase, let's do more of that. And I think that's a great leadership phrase, right? It really is a positive reinforcement for good behavior. I made a note of that phrase, and I'm going to try to use it more often.
One thing I'd like to add was a quote that he said that I literally wrote it down. I only wrote down 2 or 3 things because we were so engrossed. But he said the phrase, it's not about them, it's about us. And he used that in the context of talking about how purpose and a clear organizational purpose gave anyone the license to raise an issue and a concern, anyone at any level, because it wasn't about them. It wasn't about their standing or where they were in the hierarchy. It was about us as an organization and what we do. And that just was so powerful to me.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about how Jeff's going to impact the learning and leadership culture there. A very interesting guy, definitely approaching his relatively new job with fresh eyes, but a lot of thoughtful focus. It was a great conversation.
Jeff, thanks so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us all. You're here to talk with us about your current organization, but it wasn't very long ago that we were all together at Deloitte. So obviously we've moved on, and it's great to be back together today.
Sure is. Thanks for inviting me to join your podcast.
We're going to start with some really simple, quick and dirty questions to introduce you and your work practice and your organization, and maybe a little bit of your career history as well. So the first question is, where do you live and work, and why?
I live in the Philadelphia area here in the United States, but I really consider myself a global citizen as it relates to my work, both the practice of what we do and our business, really serving global markets. And here in Philly, I'm here for a lot of reasons, but one reason I enjoy is, Philly's really an underdog city. And it's been fun to watch the growth and renaissance of the city over the last, 10, 15 years and see that, innovation, change, and growth kind of in front of my eyes.
That's great. How long have you been in Philly?
I've been down here since 2007. And before that was in New York City.
Right on. So tell us your job title and how you would describe the work you do.
So I'm the vice president overseeing global learning and leadership development. And it's a good job. It's a good job. I'm still fresh. I'm 7 months into the job here now. But, for me, it really means how do we create the organizational capability to win in the market using all the different levers that we pull to do that. It's how do we drive a competitive culture to bring our therapies and products and solutions to more patients around the world through our people. And asking the big questions about how do we scale leadership and scale learning for a really diverse and broad employee population that spans technical development, R&D, manufacturing, and corporate roles. So it's a pretty broad job with a lot of levers to pull to drive the kinds of changes we're trying to here in the company.
Very cool. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about Medtronic itself and a bit about the business model? And part of the reason for that is we're going to be talking about purpose and how do you drive purpose throughout the business. So giving folks some context on the business model would be helpful.
I mean, Medtronic's in the medical technology space and really is the leader in that space and has a very proud history. Like a lot of technology companies, we were started in a garage about 70 years ago with our founder, Earl Bakken, who created the first battery-operated pacemaker. And that really laid the foundation for a lot of expertise about engineering and electricity and how we can apply that with different disease states and different therapies to help improve patients' lives. And the business has really grown through organic growth and a lot of inorganic tuck-in acquisition growth over the years to really work on so many different diseases and conditions. And now we're at the point where we're serving over 70 million patients per year with our therapies. And the business model is really one that relies on, intensive engineering knowledge and medical knowledge of these different disease states, a good understanding of patient needs, providers, and physician needs, and then going out and not just responding to markets, but developing and creating all new markets around the world for these products. So it's a fascinating and diverse business.
Most definitely. It sounds like it. And you alluded just a few moments ago to range of different types of employees. So can you talk a little bit about the talent landscape in your organization and different populations, job roles, demographic changes, et cetera?
Sure. We, like most companies, we're rapidly becoming, more and more filled with millennial and Gen Z talent. And for us, we have a specific emphasis on our early career talent, finding the right people from a university or early career venue, bringing them into the company and really having that be a lot of the way we drive innovation here. But that's obviously just one part of it. The core of our business is really our technical expertise and R&D. If you visit our center, our operational headquarters in Minnesota, you'll walk in and see glass paned walls with people doing lots of things that I don't know how to do behind those walls. Really experimenting with robotic arms and oscilloscopes, pushing forward our innovation. And at the same time, we have a really significant global manufacturing footprint. Some of those are large, more plant-based factories where we're producing some of our products. I mean, we've done a lot of work around ventilators of late due to COVID, but some of those are smaller, very precise, almost tailor-made facilities as well that are working on some of our very complex products. And then add on to that our corporate population, some of whom sit in a big center, some of whom sit in sales roles, some of whom sit remote. We really have it all in terms of a variety of our talent population and how and where they do their work.
So it kind of sounds like you're not busy at all, Jeff.
Yeah, got a few things to do.
Let's talk a little bit about your purpose. Does your organization have an explicit purpose statement? And if so, what is it?
We do. I mean, Medtronic has a mission, and the mission was written really towards the founding of the company. And it was built to, serve as the guiding light for the company over its complete history. And, coming into organizations, some organizations have a set of organizational values, some organizations have a set of aspirations, and oftentimes some employees in other organizations aren't